She was just a mental guy.
I need to see those when we put those agendas, stuff like that. I can read.
Did you read that? Okay.
Yeah. She was just testing, she was just testing.
You like one?
Yeah.
And if this is approved.
What's the score of the state game? What's the score of the state game?
I'm sure that was. You and Danny were hanging from the rafters on Saturday night.
I didn't believe it. I only watched the last half. So that was the best half of basketball.
It's a good ball game. Of course, nationally, baseball, game tournament.
That was the best. I was not at any money on that result.
I don't know. I think Carolina came in there with the real, I think they came in there really motivated after Duke and embarrassing at home.
Yeah.
And
I really remember. They come in there, they come in there embarrassed.
I know that at halftime when they were still within striking distance, that they could go in the ball.
Yeah, that was, I told people, I said, I'll be satisfied if the game is still competitive after 10 minutes. Because it
Well, it was
wasn't-
looking like it was about to get away from them.
Yeah.
And that fellow with the big Mountaineer beard, where did he come from? Because he was a transfer.
Oklahoma, yeah. It's like Larry Bird.
No, he looked like Joseph that came down, Joseph with a red beard, what he looked like.
LSU got Arizona, they got transferred,
I saw that.
and they got those two receivers that transferred in. They're gonna be done.
Brian Kelly.
Kelly's gonna. You see our schedule has, we open with Carolina and then go to Texas A&M.
29-24 at halftime.
I knew that they not bad. Carolina, I didn't know they were going to
They
Texas
go to
A&M.
Texas A&M, they go to Texas A&M the next Saturday. Wow.
It's gonna be hard to get hold of everybody. But Carolina.
I got season tickets.
Public meeting of North Wilkesboro Board of Commissioners now in session. Y'all please rise. Heavenly Father, thank you for every seat that has been filled here today. For each mind and heart that fills the presence of this room, we thank you. Only you know what we are setting out to accomplish today. We have an idea, a vision, hints, and daily instructions. We have talents, abilities, and time to work. However, only you can see in perfect detail the end of every beginning, every project, every season, every life. Nothing is never in vain, for even mistakes and missteps are used for good. Your righteousness transcends all our efforts and understanding. Forgive us for our pride, the pride that puffs us up and the pride that threatens to unqualify us. Strengthen our confidence in who you have made us to be. Set us free from comparison in order to work together efficiently. Bless this meeting today, all those present, as well as the lives of those we will encounter afterward. Ready us to make every moment count. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen. Please face the flag. Chief Thornburg, would you please lead us in the pledge?
Allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you, Steve. Additions and deletions to the agenda, Trooper.
Yes, sir. So a few amendments to the agenda, if you don't mind. The first is, I'd like to take the consent routine business items individually because I have a few comments to make on each one. And on item A, updated meeting calendar, Debbie passed you out an updated face page. So it contains some information that is new since the agenda was sent out on Friday. I'd also like to request that we move item F up to be heard after item C, so that our guests who are here for that item don't have to stay for the whole week.
Very good. Great. Need a motion to approve the agenda as is stated.
I make a motion to approve the agenda as stated.
Thank you, Mr. Church. Have a second?
Second.
Thank you, Ms. Betty. All those in favor? Any opposed? Motion carries. Thank you. General public comment period, we have no one. So routine business, item F.
Yes, sir. So updated meeting calendar. You have an updated face page. And the request today is to, again, update our calendar, which we've been doing a lot lately, to add a meeting and change the start time of an existing meeting. So at our last meeting together, we talked about applying for a Part F grant to help fund improvements to Smooth Park. And that grant requires that we hold a public meeting, an official public meeting of the board, to kick off the Part F application process and hear comments from the public. And the grant application actually has a very prescribed process that we have to follow. And that process is essentially this, that meeting is exclusively for Part F comments. And so we have to gavel that meeting into session, hear comments, discuss it, gavel it out, adjourn, before we can talk about anything else. And if we don't do it that way, they'll ding us on the application. And so I'm asking you all to schedule that exclusive Part F Board of Commissioners meeting for March the 24th, which is our regular time at 5:30. And then to reschedule the start time of our ordinary meeting that night to 6:15. We thought about doing it at 4:30, but Debbie's been in touch with you all about a special event that's taking place that afternoon at 4:30. So we had to do it at 5:30. So essentially what I'm asking you to do is to amend the calendar to set the special Smooth Park meeting for the 24th at 5:30 and to adjust the start time of the regular meeting to 6:15 that day.
You need motions on that? Need a motion to update the meeting calendar to change the start date. Regular meeting 6:15 and the public hearing for 5:30.
So moved.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries. Back to you, Mr.
Yes, sir. So there's also a handout for this, a corrected attachment. There was an error in the one we sent out Friday. So you should have a corrected resolution in your package there. Essentially, this action will do two things. One, it'll perform the necessary accounting moves that we're required to do to account for our American Rescue Plan dollars appropriately. And two, and this is the notable thing, why I wanted to do this one publicly instead of just as a routine agenda item. It will what's called supplant normal general fund dollars. Now, that sounds bad, but that's actually a good thing. So when ARP first came out, the initial guidance from the government was that you could only use it for certain things. And although revenue replacement was one of those things, you had to use a very complicated formula to figure out exactly how much revenue replacement you were eligible for. And it turned out that most of the cities who needed ARP dollars to replace lost revenue weren't getting that same amount of revenue, lost revenue back, because the formula was kind of weird. And so the federal government heard that feedback, and when they came out with the final guidance on eligible ARP uses, they said you can essentially up to $10 million of ARP dollars, and of course that doesn't apply to us because we only got 1.3 million, can be used for revenue replacement without the formula. But you have to use it on an eligible expense like salaries and providing general government services. If you use it on that, you can free up that money that you budgeted and use it for whatever. And so that was actually a good thing. We weren't expecting the federal government to do that. The school government has confirmed that that is what these new guidance permits. And so what this action does tonight is it takes the ARP funds, it uses ARP funds, and this is this year's tranche only, so only this fiscal year, we'll have to do it again next year. It takes the ARP money that we got, it essentially pays for all our public safety salaries, and then it frees up the public safety money for us to put in our savings account and do whatever we want to with it. So we're no longer bound by all the eligibility requirements of the federal government. We can essentially do whatever we want with that money. Last year, we did a similar thing with the CARES Act. I called it an offset. So this is essentially ARP offset. The federal government calls it supplanting, but it's essentially the same thing. So by taking this action, will actually give us some more flexibility to use ARP dollars as we wish.
We need a motion then to accept the change to American Rescue Plan Grant.
Mr. Mayor, I make a motion that we approve the resolution officially accepting American Rescue Plan dollars and to approve a series of budget amendments designed to accept and appropriate American Rescue Plan dollars budgeted in the current fiscal year according to best accounting practices as recommended by the town's auditor.
Thank you, Mr. Parks. Is there a second, please? Thank you, Mr. Hall. Those in favor? Any opposed? Motion carries. Section C, road closures.
Crystal's here if you have any questions, but this is just a routine request to close CBD loop during the concerts on the deck. And an additional request to close C Street in front of the art gallery for an event on May 6th.
Need a motion to accept the road closures as stated.
I make a motion, oh, go ahead.
We'll get,
I make a motion to approve the road closures.
thank you. All those in favor? Any opposed? Motion carries. Part 8, town manager report, Mr.
No report, sir.
Consideration of old business.
If we can move on to item
Well,
F, sir.
yeah. We'll go ahead. F is a rezoning for 101, 102, 103 Dual Trail. Dispatch.
Yes, thank you guys for moving that, so the applicant and the realtors didn't have to stay too long for a meeting. So it's before you tonight is essentially an introduction of this rezoning request. The planning board heard this request on a special meeting that was held on the 23rd and approved it, which is the last item in your staff report. But essentially what we have before us is what planners call a non-conforming use. So we've got essentially 3 houses on this property, and it's zoned general business. And general business does not allow for single family housing to be established on that property. So the request before you tonight is to call for a public hearing so we can enter into that on essentially the 24th to allow for advertising. And we're going to be rezoning 0.72 acres from general business to R6, which is high density residential. In the staff report, you can see that there is a number of high residential properties nearby zoning that way, so it's not spot zoning. But essentially what we're gonna provide for the applicant is to maintain single-family home on this property. And it would be in compliance with our zoning ordinance, because currently it is not. It's a non-conforming use and a non-conforming structure. That is becoming an issue because they're trying to sell the property, and the bank has noted those nonconformities and will not provide a loan on the property essentially. It does have access to Boone Trail, so there's no issues with that. There's water and sewer available to the property. So one of the things we want to look at when we're considering a rezoning is the consistency with our land use plan. Now, our land use plan does note this as commercial, but it can be considered reasonable given the use, the history, and other properties in the vicinity. The next thing we want to look at is what those other properties in the vicinity are. So we've got a mix of commercial, residential, the hospitals nearby, so there's a little bit of medical uses as well. And like I mentioned earlier, what other zoning districts are in the vicinity? So as you go further up Boone Trail, it becomes primarily residential. So they're right on the edge of our town limits where it is commercial in nature, but it's still several residential properties are sprinkled through that area. And the last thing, as I mentioned, what is the existing use on the property? We've got single family homes. And they're probably gonna stay single family homes in nature and not gonna change to commercial uses. And the extent that this is gonna be detrimental to the affected properties in the area is pretty low because we're actually down zoning the property, so we're not creating a more intense use. So we're staying residential, we're not gonna let business be essentially the land. So staff recommended this property to be rezoned. Our comp plan does call out several goals to try to, fix these issues when we run across them with our zoning. And the planning board, like I mentioned, did have a special hearing on the 23rd and approved it unanimously. And like I mentioned, the property owner are here tonight if you guys have any questions before we call for the public hearing.
Question.
Yes,
Are those those three little houses right there next to Williams Motel?
yes.
All right, I went over and looked at it. One of them looks like it's ready to fall down. The other two is not too bad. One looks like it needs to be just tore down.
That's probably what we'll do, but right now we got to deal with this problem first.
Anyone else any questions or comments?
Well, I will tell you that the nice home there, there's a appraisal on it for $175,000. And there's also an offer to purchase for that, and there's a young family. It's gonna close on it if we get the rezoning done. And the older house there, I think the one that's gonna tear down, the older house, if you go in it, is as nice as any home in Wilkes County. That's good.
Yes, my grandmother built that house in 1941. And my mother inherited it, and then she passed away in 2016, and I inherited. I've spent like probably $10,000 over the summer getting it ready to sell. I didn't know that, the zoning would be a problem, so requesting that you change it to residential. Thank you.
Anyone else? I don't see any reason why not to call for the public hearing this grant.
You need to do it.
You need I'll make a motion that we call for the public hearing for this rezoning of the property at 101, 103, and 105 Boone Trail. Thank you, Mr. Parsons. Need a second, please?
I'll second. Over there.
All those in favor? Any opposed? Motion carries.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you all for
Thank you
serving.
very much.
No problem.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
We'll move along then, update on our water intake. As you remember, we discussed this at the retreat, and I learned, and I know Andrew did too, has done a tremendous amount of work on this. But the further we dig on this, the more questions we have. So we'll just go over these quickly for people that didn't know, just need an update. And the new intake on the Yadkin, that's about 100 miles, or sorry, 100 yards this side of the footbridge on the Greenway near the Pearson property. All the work has been done there as far as, well, almost all right of ways, all the engineering work. We weren't able to, the board at the time wasn't able to get that pushed through back in 2019. So the hardest part about this, I think, is going to be to convince folks that object to it about the water intake. But it is a very small area compared to the other watersheds in the county, and a tremendous amount of Wilkes County is under watershed. So we've got 485,000 acres in the county. This is the additional 14,000. However, it's right next to one town of Wilkesboro, which is a zone 4. And the zone 4 is the least restricted. And so as Andrew Palmer said, as you move up 421, going out towards Walmart, going out to the dam, that is the Wilkesboro watershed, and all that is level 4. So if people are worried about restrictions, or it's my property, I can't do this, but probably not, because that's probably one of the most heavily developed areas in the county, is that 421 court. So that will be the toughest part, is getting that done, is handling any objections. I do expect them, because we can't make a decision, no one can, and have everyone to agree with it. I think the vast majority of the 67,000 people in Wilkes County think that we do need more water, we do need an additional intake. And of course, this is because the Redis River is drought prone. So that's one area. So the second was, we can buy water for a downhill flow, a downhill portion of our water from Wilkesboro. That's still expensive, and this was estimated at 1.1 million. But it's like putting a Band-Aid on a cut that really needs stitches. This is a small part, it may not cover it all, and then it makes us dependent on Wilkesboro. The first one, having the brand new intake over there at the area I just mentioned, that would also give us a redundant system, so we could have two sources for water. And then buying all our water from Wilkesboro, that's about a plus $5 million. That puts in a big 12-inch main. But once again, there's no additional intake, and that would make us dependent on Wilkesboro to supply us with water. Also, our the way we treat water is different from how City of Wilkesboro treats their water. The chemicals are not compatible with our piping. They worry about, the engineers do, about breaking loose deposits, sediments, and those things. So, and we also would have to, either one of 2A and 2B would require pumping stations. So it would still be very expensive to do. And then to not incur any changes in the watershed, actually as we build in the Wilkesboro watershed, would be to run the new intake up the Yadkin as far as Moravian Creek. However, the worst part is to be about $14.6 million, and those are 2019 dollars, which would be substantially more today. So one thing I want to point out, and I was been talking about a lot, if we can go through with option 1, the homework's been done. Funding was approved once, but the very first line there under funding notes, it says no current funding source identified. And I think it's really, really important to get that nailed down as to where's the money coming from, and how much, and from whom. Because one thing we were elected to do is to be careful with the taxpayer dollars. So, and they're gonna, I think I have a meeting in the morning with the land developer. We're also going to involve again our state representative to get this done. carefully, but also in a timely manner. Mr. Palmer, you have anything you'd like to add?
I got a few things. I guess the main thing for me is why are we wanting to do this? And, in a nutshell, I've got a few reasons. One, it would give Wilkes County more water capacity for years and decades to come, which I believe water is the backbone of a municipality. And it would allow us to get water to people on wells, which is a quality of life thing. And it would open opportunities up for job creators and industry, and water capacity is something we have here in Wilkes. Also, I'll say this is a county issue. This is not a North Wilkesboro issue. We have 1,780 meters in North Wilkesboro city limits that we service. But we have 12,213 meters in the county that we service. And that's through 4 water associations. So we touch nearly 14,000 people in the, 14,000 meters in the county. And if you, according to census data, you can multiply that by 2.35 people per meter. I'll give you a rough estimate about how many people we touch in the county of 67,000 people. The Reddy's River is drought prone. In 2001, it was really bad. In 2008, it was bad. And we need a source for our town, but also the county that's more reliable, like the Yadkin. We also have like a silt issue that we have to dredge out at the Reddy's. So that's why we can't put another one on the Reddy's. And I think it's important for people to know that. That's why we want to go to the Yadkin. And a few more points I'll add is just looking at it as a big picture. The class 4 restriction is the least restrictive of all the watershed classifications. Wilkesboro's water intake at the Yadkin is a class 4 restriction. Like Mark said, think about Walmart and everything up there. That was established, the latest date would have been January 1st, 1994. So everything that's been developed up there since then has been done so under that watershed. And that watershed of theirs is about 30,000 acres. Ours will butt up next to it, the watershed that would create, and it's about 14,000 acres. And it's going through an area of the county that's arguably much less developable than Walmart. And our county's 485,000 acres, like Mark said, roughly. There's 179,000 acres in our county that are already under watershed. And this won't change any of that. This will add an extra 14,000 acres. So when you look at it at the big picture, we're asking for 14,000 more acres. And it's going to be class 4, which is the least restrictive. And we're only going to ask this one time. This isn't something that will come back 4 or 5 years from now or 10 years from now. This is like a once in a generation ask. I mean, if we get it, it'd be pretty rare that anybody would ever ask for something else like this moving forward. And I believe that a lot of people in the county would support this because, you know, it's going to affect the people that live on those 14,000 acres. But it is, like I said, the least restrictive classification. But you got to think about the other 470,000 acres of land with landowners in Wilkes County, who it's not going to affect them. And yet we're trying to, as a town, look at right now, or even going to talk about it tonight, ways that we can take water and sewer to people in the county that are not, you know, part of the town and may not have to be annexed in if we're able to do it. So we're looking at ways to take water to people in Wilkes County who don't have it right now, who are on wells. And that's important for their quality of life, but it's also important for things like firefighting. And I think that's just the big question, is just why do we want to do it? And that's my reasons why. And I would hope that, you know, the county and Wilkesboro would see the big picture with Wilkes County as a whole and how it can help our county for generations to come when all of us are not even here anymore. And that's all I got.
Thank you, Mr. Palmer. So it is, I think, important to remember that this is for the entire county and for all the people in the county to benefit. So we want, I don't want to go into this too much deeper tonight because we're still building and gathering information. And so we find out the answer to one question and there's 2 more we also need to answer. So does anyone else have any questions or comments? Go ahead.
I have one more important thing I would say. Like, when you think about this project, now is the time to do it. Not 10 years from now, not 20 years from now, because it's gonna go up in price, as we saw with the Scott project. And the restrictions on this issue are not gonna get lighter. If anything, they're gonna get stronger over time. It's gonna get harder to do something like this over time. Just that's the nature of the world we live in. And I just think for our county, that now is the time to do it. And also, the funding opportunities from the state may be much better now than they have been in a long time and than they will be. So now is the time to do this.
Thank you, Mr. Farmer.
And this water issue has been going on for as long as I can remember. I mean, North Wilkesboro has had a problem with our current water source, whether it be drought prone, silt buildup, everything like that. So this is not a new problem. This is, I mean, like I said, this is a problem that about as long as I can remember, this discussion about what are we going to do for North Wilkesboro's water has been, it permeates so many conversations, and it really is time to make choices and hard choices. And if it, I mean, I know we all have to work together and be cohesive, but this is one of those things where if, we're looking at one of these directions, we need to be truly focused on trying to make it happen.
Thank you, Mr. Parsons.
One other thing that's worth adding, we talk about giving our county an increased capacity. Right now, our plan is certified to do 4.2 million gallons a day. And the new intake would be, looking to make it maybe 6 million gallons per day, which we'd have to upgrade our treatment plant to be able to increase capacity. But with 2 intakes, it would allow us in the future, as time moves on, that if they wanted to do the upgrades, that you could go up to theoretically maybe 10 million gallons a day. And it's also important to note that having the Reddy's intake, it's right down the hill from where our plant is, which is good because you don't have to pump the water far. If the place where we want to put the intake in a straight line is about 1 mile from our treatment plant. And the pipes aren't going to go straight. And over, one of the options, the last option was to move it up above Moravian Creek, which is essentially beside Wilkesboro's intake. That's about 2 miles away. And not only is that more expensive, but you have to figure in the cost of energy for the pumps pumping the water back, because over time, that's a real expense. And so having the Reddy's intake there and having one on the Yadkin would allow us to look at the conditions of the water and what we're going to bring in. But also, just for the sake of the county, I think it's good to have 2 different rivers. Most counties or towns don't even have the option to have an intake on 2 different rivers. I mean, God forbid anything ever happened, but if you ever had something get dumped into one of the rivers, or a gas truck fell over on 421 and it drained into the Prescott, our county would have the Reddy's. So it's good to have those 2 different rivers, in my opinion. But I just wanted to toss out, when I talk about the capacity, we're at 4.2, but that would give us room to grow up to like 10. I know Wilkesboro is doing a lot to make their capacity like 10 or 12. And it would really, having a water capacity like that for our county to give us the chance to take infrastructure out to people, but also could attract businesses in a way that other counties can't, because they maybe don't have that capacity. And just so you know, when the dam was built, Winston-Salem and Wilkes County have rights to that water. And it's a little more complicated than I'll try to explain because I'll probably mess it up. But that's a unique situation for our county. A lot of their counties don't have that situation where, if they allow the watershed, we can just get the water. And that's a real blessing for Wilkes County. And we need to use that as leverage to strengthen this county financially, economically moving forward. And that's definitely not that.
Well, I'm doing that for 20 years. I have, and it's hard.
Yeah.
You think it's hard to do.
Yeah.
It's gonna be hard. Everything.
A lot of communities away from us, Greensboro, they need water.
the amount of people in that area, that, if we can have a situation where we could supply water to other areas, it happens all the time. So I'm hoping we can, go out further.
So, Ms. Baird, do you have kind of a plan of action? Kind of where, what, because again, this is one of those topics that can easily end up being something that we talk about endlessly.
Right.
Do you have a plan of action that, we can kind of get a spur of the horse, so to speak, so that we know, when do we need to find this funding source by? When do we need to approach, when do we need to have all our i's dotted and t's crossed? Because, like I said, I just don't want to see talk anymore about this. I feel like this board has kind of taken on a can-do attitude.
Mhm.
And so I'd like to just continue that.
Yes, actually, I have a meeting with the developer tomorrow, when they projected strongly to this back in 2019. We're also going to involve our state representative by, I think this week. I definitely have a phone call with him.
Just to keep kind of see what
Tomorrow, Thursday.
funding opportunities.
And we have another, that's the most important thing, is we got, how we will pay for it. And what is the most efficient option of these four, what's the best one for people in the county? And also on the 28th, we have a meeting with the county.
And we met with the county.
We did.
We've talked to them, we haven't met with the county, but we've talked to some of the people. It's pretty much gonna be up to the county and Wilkesboro to be okay with reclassifying the new watershed. And that's the first hurdle.
Option one, that's gonna be what they have to vote for it, and we'll see which way, where the cards fall there. And, what the public would think of the vote, either way.
And to kind of quantify what the concerns may be is like landowners that are gonna be under the watershed will have watershed restrictions on their properties. So I would assume the county's concerned about that. And they're concerned about developers. That's why it's important to talk to the developers. One thing I learned during all this, whether or not we do this intake, the state allows a lot of tools to help people that maybe are building up to the level of surface area that can be covered on the property. There are a lot of things that you can do to allow more density. And I knew there had to be, because cities all across the state have to be doing these things. And I would just encourage our county and towns to be constantly looking at things like that the state allows, so that we can grow and not let this hinder us. But from everything I've learned, I haven't seen anything where this has been super restrictive in my conversations with people where it's caused an issue. I think it's more of a perception thing. So if anybody's out there watching this in the county, I would say, look at what this could do for our county, and the net gain versus, what is a small sacrifice as far as these restrictions in the overall scheme of things. And just consider, if you're on a well, it's gonna take stuff like this for us to spider web our lines out into the county to get people on water and sewer, which moving forward, I think would be a positive thing for our county.
And Andrew, I want to reiterate the point that you made again, because you just said restrictions, but you look at that watershed up 421, where you have all of that development, shopping centers, housing, multifamily, gas stations, loans companies. There doesn't seem to have slowed down any of that development. So restrictions needs to be kind of taken, it's not as restrictive as people want to believe, because it certainly hasn't slowed down anything up to 421 corridor.
For example, you can have up to 2 houses per acre, and in residential, but you could also have up to 3 houses if you didn't have curbs or gutters on that property. Or, you know, if you do the 2-house deal, it would be 24% of the land could be covered by impervious surface, like your actual building, your house, whatever, and your driveway. Or if you do the 3 per acre, it would be 36%. Just to give you an idea, an acre is 43,560 square feet. Even at 24% of an acre, that sounds like, well, that can only build on 24%. That's 10,454 square feet, which for most people is way beyond what anybody is gonna use. I mean, that's a large amount of space, and, you know, my house, we built a house and moved in 2 years ago. It's in the watershed. We're in the watershed for the Reddies, which is a class 2, which is much more restrictive than the class 4 that we're talking about. And, my fear is, I believe it's the right thing to do for a county. My fear is that people are just gonna not see the details and actually learn what this means. They're just gonna see, whoa, they wanna put a restriction, but it's not anything that's crazy. You know, like, when you wanna think about what kind of restrictions, we need to get some maps to the paper so that people can see. But, you know, everything from, you know, like the dam over there, all the way over up to Ashe County and eastern part of the county is already under watershed. And, you know, just to drive it home and simplify it, think about all the development of the Walmart and all those areas up there. You know, that's high density stuff, and it's all built under that same watershed. So just keep that in mind.
Don't put it down.
Mr. Mayor, may I make a comment? So far, I've heard no real change in strategy from the retreat. We're still pursuing option 1, but we're still keeping option 2 in the air as a possibility. So we're still pursuing option 1.
There, yeah.
Yes, sir.
And there.
And keeping 2 alive. Number 1, our preferred option. Number 2, this is, I'm asking for clarity. I haven't heard an
Option 1 is
objection.
still my preference.
Okay,
No.
As is mine.
But it's gonna be, as Bert says, it's gonna be tougher to hook.
so that was my next comment, Mayor, and that is, would the board consider sort of setting a deadline? Make the case through the summer, and if we don't get the result we want through the summer, go ahead and apply to the state for funding for option D, just so this won't keep going along.
We're gonna go on the 28th, I think by the 28th we'll be.
Well, this, people I've talked to, it's hard to get anybody in the county to agree with us. The commissioners are scared of their developers and they will not stand up to them. And that's the way I feel. Now, I may be wrong, but that's the way I feel. And I don't think option 2 or 3,
No.
those are just out of the question.
No.
I would never vote for either one. And that's my opinion. I think either 1 or 4 is where we gotta go if not, we gotta do something. And I asked the question, is it legal to go ahead and build it without their blessing? And I was told no.
Well, we'll burn that bridge when we get there as a church, but I think that that's the board that go maybe with option 1, which I think would be best for the people of the county. After the meeting of the 28th, I was told by someone that we're not going to string you along. So I think we'll know more after the 28th. I think the deadline, I can't see it, I could be wrong, going into the summer at all. I think we'll know more then. But there's 2, 3 meetings we have to get through that are gonna help us a lot. And from that point, we'll go to charter course forward.
My personal opinion is that North Wilkesboro and the county need an intake. As far as hooking our system up with Wilkesboro, I think that that's an important thing to do as like a backup, so that if our water treatment plant had an issue, that we could get water from them if there's an emergency, or vice versa. But my personal opinion is, from the information I've seen, and I could discuss it more, which probably at a later time we will, I won't get into it tonight, but weighing all the things, I'm not interested in buying water from them full time, for a variety of reasons.
Yes, sorry, so let me, I want to clarify, apologies to the board. So options 2A and 2B on this list should have included the phrase "in emergency situations."
I agree.
That's all right.
So
I agree
I
there.
just wanted to make that
I
clear.
can read it. I had,
Now, are we
I
having
did
any
it.
feedback from the community as they see the paper? I have not heard a lot of feedback. Have you guys heard a lot of feedback on
no,
On the what?
no, just a little bit.
any feedback from citizens about needing, the need for additional water source?
Not much, but we haven't, no important decisions have been made yet.
I feel like this is one of those things that if you went and you knocked on every citizen's door in Wilkes County and told them what you're trying to do, I think particularly the people that don't live in those acreage would support it. The thing is it's not a very, headline grabbing thing that people are gonna be interested in. So most people just probably won't pay attention to it as long as, you will probably hear from the people that are against it, but maybe not people that are for it, because it's just not that, it's not on their radar. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So we need to look at where we need to be in 10 years. What about our grandchildren? Where they gonna be water?
Anyone else on the board have any care to add?
Well, I'd say that, it's Wilkes and Wilkesboro and North Wilkesboro would,
We'll have a
yeah,
water before we all get.
yeah, it was, yeah. And, for one time,
Like a water,
mine and yours.
like a county water association.
Yeah, we did that, I mean, we did what, long time. I like,
Like the idea that, so,
yeah.
so y'all were
They
trying.
know so do it, they don't do it, but,
Yeah.
you know, I think we would.
I like that too. I think in the long run, that would probably strengthen the county more than anything.
Everything would.
Yeah.
They won't do it, they won't do it.
But be that as it may, we do all agree that we need another.
Yeah, we do.
Okay. If there's nothing else, we'll go ahead on to item B, water sewer policy. Mr. Hooper.
Okay, so last time we talked about this, the feedback from the board was to consider tweaks to the policy that would allow us to extend water and sewer eligibility to folks outside the town limits, but try to maintain the incentive to be annexed. And so the proposal that I've come up with to do that is to somewhat counterintuitively make water and sewer utilities more affordable for folks outside the ETJ and more expensive for folks inside the ETJ who are eligible to be annexed as an incentive to be annexed. Before I talk about that possibility much further, I want to say that based on the information that Danny and I have seen about the legality of charging different rates to folks outside the county, we do think, based on the case law that we've read, that we've got broad latitude to do this. But I suspect that we have to be consistent within classifications. So if you're outside the ETJ, you're outside the ETJ. All those people gotta have the same rate. If you're inside the ETJ, all those folks have to have the same rate. So within classifications, you gotta be consistent, but you can provide different rates to different types of classifications of customers. Two notes, and that is if we pursued this option that I just made, I think that the exceptions that we talked about last time would only be applicable to customers outside the ETJ. So on the red lined attachment in your agenda, only to section 3. They would not be applicable to sections 1 and 2. Anyone in sections 1 and 2 would be eligible to tap on if they were willing to pay the price. So that's one clarification I wanted to make. I tried to add some thoughts in there about criteria for what constitutes an economic development project that would make it eligible to tap on. I put 4 options there for you to consider. And then on the back of this page, I put a table sort of comparing the rates that these different classes of customers would pay if we took this path. And you'll notice that the ETJ folks actually did a really good deal. Because they would get only 2 times the in-town rate, and then of course not have their town taxes to pay. But the folks who are inside the ETJ would still have a financial incentive to annex, because even with town taxes, at a rate as described here, they'd be paying more for their water and sewer than they would if they were paying the in-town rate and their town taxes. So that's one way to keep the annexation incentive, is to make it a financial incentive. So that's the path I wanted to hear your thoughts on as a way to maintain that annexation incentive.
You know what Salisbury was doing with their rates?
I think they were doing that as a result of, no, I don't. But I think they were making those changes because they had some economic development projects like us on the horizon. And they wanted to make sure that those folks were eligible to tap on, but not, throw their entire policy out the door.
It seems like charging somebody 4 times the amount, I know that that kind of equates to the tax rate and stuff going in there. But it seems like compared to that chart you gave us last week, that seems kind of high. But I see what you're trying to do.
Yes, yes.
I see what you're trying to do, but I guess my thing is if somebody's paying taxes, they're also getting more than water and sewer. They're getting police, fire, trash. And so it kind of makes me think the number may be too high, but I don't know, that's a hard thing to figure out, I guess.
It is, but, of course, it could take for granted that once they were annexed, they would go back to town. But also into this, that the return on your investment, the time it takes to recover, even with a bad hookup fee to break even, to recover your money on water and sewer is tremendous. Very. But I do see.
So like if the water line's already going by their property or something and they get on it, their fee doesn't cover what it costs to get them on it.
Right. So and it's not, and correct me if I'm wrong, Mr. Hooper, but these are well within line of our neighboring communities and municipalities.
Well, the 2 times the in-town rate, yes, sir, is. The 4 times rate is not. I mean, that would be a unique thing. That'd be a unique possibility. But remember, not many communities even make very many properties outside their town limits eligible.
True.
And so there's not a lot of comparisons to draw from.
Okay.
Well, I feel like if you were gonna do it, and maybe I'm backwards about this, but started high, and not many people got on it, you could always lower it, but it would be a lot harder to do the opposite.
Correct. Right.
Because they're gonna be like,
So I was gonna ask Meredith, if she steps out. So our ETJ covers a 1 mile buffer zone around the corporate limits. Okay, correct? Is that 1 mile?
Yes, sir.
Right.
So the question I have is how does it work? Meredith, you're back. I have this question for you. So our ETJ is a mile around the corporate limits, a mile, basically a mile buffer zone. So how does, so there's the one that is contiguous, is that the word?
Contiguous.
Contiguous that to the town limits, but then, let's say you were 3/4 of a mile outside of the corporate limits, but still within the ETJ. And that person wanted to annex into the town. So how does that process work when you do not have to, so long as their zoning is consistent with their request, and it's just a matter of public hearings and that kind of stuff to annex a property? Or, I mean, what is involved if someone in that ETJ decided not to pay, that wanted to say, okay, well, we're ready to be annexed? So how does that work in the ETJ?
So the ETJ has already established zoning districts for us.
Right, it's
It's already- yeah.
consistent with our current zoning,
Can you turn the zoning there on, quick, so you can see, so
Which
that
way?
way, the zoning? So that way you can see, you've already got, zoning's been figured out versus like a satellite annexation. So everything you see that's colored is our ETJ and town limits, and it's been assigned the zoning classification. Of course, we've got overlay districts, but for tonight's purposes, we won't get into that. Satellite annexations are a lot more complicated when they're outside the ETJ, because then we have to assign them a zoning district. And the legality of putting those two together to run simultaneously gets a little complicated. So if you're in the ETJ and you want to annex in and you're really far out, unless you want to rezone at the same time, you would just annex.
okay. So the process for someone in the ETJ to request to be annexed, is, as long as they're within the ETJ, is not that difficult, correct?
Right, yeah, as I say, they're already zoned, we don't have to figure it out unless they want to change it. We just go through the annexation process, which is essentially y'all's purview. Now, take it to the planning board as a courtesy, but the board of commissioners is who makes that decision.
Question. So if you're an ETJ and you want to annex, and there's 10 houses down, can you annex that one house and not the rest of them?
Sure.
So
I mean,
that'd be sort of like spot zoning.
we only allow voluntary annexation. They
Okay.
no longer allow the 3/4 rule anymore, which you might be thinking of.
Yeah.
So if one person, I mean, you go down 115, you can see all the individual properties
Yeah,
that
that's
come
what
in.
I'm doing. Okay.
Some of them have only come in to get sewer access. Yeah, exactly. So, yeah, there's one like way out there. So, yeah, anybody can voluntarily annex, and recently our state legislation removed the cap. There was a cap on how much annexation you could pull into your community essentially. And Elmore got that cap removed, so we don't, it used to be 10%, so we don't have to worry about that anymore. We can grow and annex if people wish to.
Excuse me, Meredith, isn't there a copy out though that subdivisions have to come in all at once?
I think for purposes of running sewer and water, I think that's what the town has been recommending, but like the example of being on 115. So it might be a case by case situation. Like if you just want to annex and get public services, you can, but if you want to hook onto our water and sewer, that might be where we have to look and see what's feasible to run infrastructure out there.
Well, the biggest thing I think of that though, Wilson, is that, you know, for example, the Linwood property, they are outside of our ETJ, so they would have to have 100%, unless that's changed, they would have to have 100% support within that subdivision, but I don't know, do we have many subdivisions that are actually still in our ETJ that?
We've had a few that have called and asked, and I think what Wilson's talking about is the town is required to provide so many services within so many years of annexation. And one of the biggest ones is water and sewer. So running that infrastructure out to a residential neighborhood, it's quite costly to hit all of those individual properties. So that might be the unwritten rule, or it might be a rule we have to look to see if the whole neighborhood has to come in, or if just one or two, because I believe we've got that case out on 268 also, where just a few houses have come in.
So the other thing I just want to say out loud so that I know everyone knows it is that state law also gives us permission to decide whether or not we want to extend utility service to folks outside the town limits. So even if we waive the annexation requirement, or even if someone says, sorry, I want to go back. So even if we waive the annexation requirement, we still get to decide on a case-by-case basis whether we extend it out to someone. And so I imagine that our criteria that we use is that you're there near an existing line. If you're miles away from an existing line and, you know, we're not planning on running one out there, then of course we're not going to agree to connect you because we don't want to make that big investment. But if the new Speedway line is running by your property and you want to tap on, you'd be eligible. But the board gets the thumbs up or thumbs down on all of this.
If somebody pay for their own line and hook on to town, if you're out 2 miles and you want to fund your own line and hook on to town, you do that?
I'd presume that that would be eligible if you worked out your easements and rights of way and so forth yourself. Yes, ma'am.
If they can pay for it and donate it to the town.
That is actually part of this, some of the policies I've seen. You can do that, but of course you have to build it to the town standards, or else we won't accept it.
I think the question is, are we comfortable with the rates for this? And do we want to go ahead and put this on the March 24th meeting for a public hearing? So I think that's what I, in my original thought on all this is that it did open up. I don't know that I necessarily played the ETJ factor into my head when I originally was thinking about this. I knew that there would need to be higher costs involved if you were not in town versus out of town. Well, I'm gonna be honest with you, I'm kind of a little like Andrew there. I think the ×4 may be a little obsessive or a little much. I think I could be okay with a 3 times.
Well, I was going to suggest, Commissioner, that if you all are okay with the concept of using the rates to incentivize annexation for ETJ properties, we can codify that in the ordinance now. And then when we get to budget season a month from now, we start talking about rates and fees, we can set the appropriate rate then.
Then I don't know how everybody, but I'm gonna throw it on the table. I make a motion to call for a public hearing on March 24th, 2022 to discuss changing the ordinance for let's see, consider changes to chapter 18 of the town code, amending eligibility for town utilities, water/sewer. And the, do I need to say something about this?
Well, so let me ask a clarifying question. So using the rates as the incentive, the carrot and the stick, will require slight changes to the red line document that I sent. And that is only, the exceptions would only apply to number 3. So the 2 red lines there, number 1 and 2, will not be in the language that we advertise. And since we didn't talk about it today, I'll keep the blue text in the exceptions, options 1, 2, 3, 4 out.
All right, I withdraw my motion for just a moment, just to make sure we clarify this motion correctly. All right. Say that again, why on number 1 and number 2, you would need to drop that red line?
Because all properties who'd be willing to pay the higher fee would be eligible. And so you wouldn't need to evaluate them based on whether they meet the exceptions.
Where's my confusion?
I've got a question, but I don't want to use it anymore.
Now's the time to clarify.
Okay, well, this is kind of a cost thing, but I'm just thinking, if you're asking the ETJ to pay twice as much as people that don't live in the ETJ, because you're saying that they could get annexed pretty easily, it's more hard for sorry, it's harder for somebody that's not in the ETJ, right? So, but it's still a process, like, it has to be approved. Somebody from the ETJ just can't say, I want to be annexed. We have to approve that. I almost wonder, when that conversation comes, maybe it should all just be the same fee. Maybe we should make it.
All right, so
Can we do
about last time. It's good, today. But yeah, because what you're trying to establish, none of that, when I was asking the trooper, the question is, do we want to put it on as a public hearing?
Let's do it, don't do it. Let's do the rates now. Is that what you're saying?
He's saying do the public hearing.
No.
Nope.
Table. Table,
Table it.
yeah,
Table, all right.
okay.
I make a motion that we table this until next meeting,
Next time,
the 24th.
yeah.
Okay, I make a motion that we table this so that we can clarify a couple of things, but I think I understand what you're saying, Wilson, on 1 and 2 now, is that if we're basically, the way this reads now, you cannot attach to services unless you're annexed.
Correct.
And then we were proposing to add unless we pursuant to our, and what you're saying is that if we do what I just was originally making the motion for,
Mhm.
then there's no need to waive it because it's already waived, correct?
Correct.
Okay.
For ETJ property.
Right, so we basically would be just charging whatever rate we decide,
Mhm.
and then we don't need to waive, we don't need to make any type of declaration of waiving ETJ things, it's just automatically written into the ordinance that they don't have to be annexed, period, unless they choose to. Is
Yes,
that
sir.
correct?
That's correct.
Okay, all right. I clarified that. So, but I still continue with my motion so that we all make sure we're on the right page.
Yeah.
We'll table this
Got it.
until the 24th.
I'll second.
Got it.
Yeah.
All those in favor? Any opposed? Motion carries.
Well, I like your analysis, Commissioner. We'll sharpen our pencils again. Bring it back.
Part D, briefing on town code, zoning code regarding arcades, that's Chief Thornburg. That's
Yes, I'll just make some introductory comments on this. I'll let Meredith and Chief Thornburg talk about the need for this, but I'll just say that Wilkesboro is also considering this an issue, and they're doing some things in their code as well to try to prevent the growth of these kinds of businesses. But this will probably not be the last time we have to do this, because one of the things that this industry is notorious for is finding new ways to skirt around the law. And so the General Assembly is constantly having to update the law over and over again to cover the new types of games that this industry comes up with. And the state courts are constantly hearing the industry's challenges to those laws. So this is an evolving issue. We actually think that by updating the code in a way that we'll describe here shortly, that we'll bring back to you later, once Danny can digest the most recent North Carolina Supreme Court ruling and create some language for a code update that complies with that. But this will actually put us a step ahead of the state and give us some extra legal protections so that, we'll be a couple steps ahead. So I'll ask Chief Thornburg to describe the issue, the challenge, and why this is, we think this is an important change to it.
Our current ordinance with gaming and games of chance says no carnival shall operate in the city limits or town limits under this ordinance. It doesn't say business or establishment, it says no carnival. So we need to change this to say no business or establishment. Our current Which one is it on?
You have to, gambling.
Yeah. Our current business permits will not allow a business permit to be issued with it. So that's the one way that we are able to keep them out, but they were in the majority of our gas stations and convenience stores around town. Now, there's a loophole in the law. I'm gonna sit down here. There was a loophole in the law for these shop and save sweepstakes machines. And I'm sure you've seen them in gas stations around town. And they were allowed to operate while the lawsuit was ongoing in the state of North Carolina. And they lost the lawsuit about 3 weeks ago. And when they lost the lawsuit, we were able to go around to all of our gas stations and convenience stores and have them shut down. The good part for us is all of that is controlled through the ALE, the alcohol law enforcement. So the good part for us is all of ours were in convenience stores and gas stations. And since they are regulated, the gaming machines are regulated through the ALE, if they didn't shut them down, we pick up the phone, we call the ALE, they come in, they take their alcohol license and their lottery license on the spot. And once we tell them that, they say, oh, okay, they unplug their machines, turn them around, shove them in the corner, because if they lose their alcohol sales and their lottery sales, they might as well shut their doors and turn the lights off and go home. Because that's where they get the majority of their money. Wilkesboro, on the other hand, they got their hands full because they've already got established places operating that don't sell alcohol, and that's all they solely do. That's
How
what,
many does Wilkesboro have right now?
I think they have 6. Yes, and they currently have a moratorium on no more. They cannot have any more. And when we attended our online webinar with the ALE, the first thing that they told us is when you do your undercover investigations with those establishments that do not have alcohol and you raid them and you bust them, go ahead and be ready 100%, you're gonna get sued. Because they have pockets full of money. And I mean, these places are bringing in 100,000+ per week profit. And, you know, they're preying on people that don't have the money to be spending on this stuff. So we've been able to keep those establishments out, but I want to strengthen our ordinance to keep those establishments out. Because they're all the time coming up with little loopholes to bring them back and bring new things in, just like these little sweepstakes things and coming in and saying, oh, it's not a game of chance, it's a game of skill. And you know, they're all the time coming up with little things of saying, oh, you don't spend any money here to make any money here. You know, you're spending money in another state on a card over the internet, and you're getting money from another state on a card that comes in from somewhere else. You know, they'll come up with something different every week. So we need to strengthen our ordinance to keep this out. And we're gonna work on the wording of this and strengthen it up.
So I guess there's I have no objections, okay. So, yeah, just wanted to make sure, because, you know, these are revenue generating properties, but they have lots of social costs, and so we wanted to make sure that you were all aware of that.
I just would like to highlight one of these talking points. One such business in Caldwell County had 1,446 calls for service over a 4-year period, including 30 drug violations, 13 larcenies, and 13 overdoses.
They have 2.
That's crazy.
They have 2 of those establishments.
That's like every day they're going out there.
Continuously.
And 13 overdoses kind of tells you that there's bad stuff going on.
Yes. They are so, these places, they have bouncers at the front door. The the one over here, next to Cagney's. One of the guys that works for us, his brother goes over there. And, he was telling us that there was a gentleman that went over there that drives a Cadillac that has the, key fob that knows when you walk up to the door. And they have cell phone jammers because they don't want you to, there's something you can do with a cell phone that'll communicate somehow and help you win more coins somehow. So they use cell phone jammers inside the buildings. And these cell phone jammers are so strong, when he went outside, he could not start his car. They had to call a tow truck to tow his car to the other side of the parking lot so he could start his car because the cell phone jammers are so strong. And I mean, it's just, you know, you think about that and you start thinking, is this the kind of place that I want to go to visit, that, you know, that the cell phone jammers are so strong, I can't even start my own car. So, yeah, it's just, they're very seedy. So.
Please
We're
proceed.
working on it.
Quicker the better.
Thank you.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Emerging issues.
I've got that thought. We talked a few weeks ago about the beautification committee. Has there been any? Get back on?
That's right. I remember it being the park committee. Is that what you're thinking?
Remember we talked about, I had some people contact, I think it would be easier to do the cemetery thing, where they would, do things with helping, you know, beautify downtown and,
I'm kind of just with the town manager. Finding a friends of the park kind of committee, but
that would be good.
So
We talked about beautification in downtown, and we're gonna check on getting these trees trimmed. before
Yeah,
that.
well, we're doing that.
Some of these trees are getting so big, we need to consider replacing them.
Yeah, I mean, we got that in the works, so.
Andrew, all the volunteers that we could find to do things, that's, yeah.
I thought I'd already brought it up. Well, anyway, I think we could find people that do it and we could, you know, I don't know who would come up with the scope of what they do, but they could help with things like, you know, making sure the Christmas decorations are done and, you know, anything that had to do with beautifying the town. Angela?
The Women's Service League does come out and do pots and freshen up pots. So there is a group of people who works with the flower pots, and that's a given.
Yes, there is, water. Trim.
Actually, I had thought originally, because you know, I can't, there's a neighbor in town that has really beautiful flowering pots in the summer. I don't even want to say their name anymore, like, it's like, are we talking about? And I had said that maybe like local businesses wanted to sponsor our planters in downtown. And, you know, there are some strategically placed, but I approached Crystal, because evidently they're in charge of the planters in downtown, even though they are the towns, even though they're in downtown.
It's been a given over the years.
Yeah,
They've always done it.
And the women's center is,
Women's Service League.
yeah, the Women's Service League handles it. I had actually approached them about like, just because, not that they're unattractive, they just,
I agree with you. They're
Yeah.
sparse.
yeah,
If you drive through other communities, they're overflowing with loveliness.
right.
And ours are just like waiting to be watered. But it
So
is
what
the
you're
truth.
saying is ours stink.
It's the truth. With that being said, for many years, like we went to Lowe's and got things that are about dead and we planted them and watered them and hoped they came back.
Yeah.
Surely to gosh, we can have enough funds to actually buy flowers with flowers on them or things that can grow and turn into something beautiful and are kept up. And in past years, we've driven around and watered them on poles and watered them here and there. And I did see the guys start to do some of that when it got to the water, or maybe they were watching something.
I can't tell you how many $5 buckets of water I've seen Donna go for.
I've seen Don go forth, do more work downtown on the flowers than anybody in this town.
She has, and she's made a big impact on it, but we still have a little ways to go.
So I confess this hasn't been on the top of my pile, so can I recommend that I just get with staff and gather some more information on what our current practices and maybe follow up with you all in my Friday memo?
I think we
Yeah.
need to work with Donna, and then I also think we need to buy, the town needs to fund some plants. Surely we have enough money for,
I can include the information on that in the follow-up.
right?
I think, I'm sorry, I'm
You
gonna
was
say,
having
can I say
surgery
something?
tomorrow, you know, ain't got time to do it.
And I'm not gonna spill the beans, but Mr. Hooper has a good plan.
Well,
It's gonna beautify Main Street.
Let's hear it.
I'm not gonna tell,
Part of it.
I'm not gonna tell, but it's possibly in the works. And
Is he gonna paint the street?
wouldn't you agree, Mayor?
Yes.
We're not gonna spill the beans yet.
Well,
We're not gonna spill the beans.
I need four board, please. I mean, here.
You
Holly,
all
did you
brought
want to make a
first-
comment?
I just, I think one of the things that's lacking in our small community is, small business engagement. And I think a good way to engage with small businesses is to ask them to get involved in things like this. You know, and yes, you're asking them for something, but most small businesses, I mean, us personally, like, the boys next door, the boys that have the shop next door to us, right? They put up those ugly orange cones in between my business and their business, because they don't want our customers parking in their parking spots, because they have this tiny parking lot. I was like, why don't y'all buy some planters and I'll buy some plants? And it's a lot more attractive. I mean, it's one of those things, like, I think if a planter is out in front of your store, you want it to look great, right, Michael? Like, yours always look really nice. I think that you should attempt to engage small businesses in the community in any way possible, and I think this is another way to do it.
I just need some that are flood resistant.
Yes, well, yours are flood resistant, yeah.
But one thing to note is we're offering businesses to support our music over the summer. And so at Ivy Ridge, I'm gonna do that the month of May, and it's $700. So we need to be aware of how much we, push our businesses and, make sure that, let's just see if we can get enough people to come around.
Well, the reason I brought this up is because when I was looking at the Christmas decorations back in January, December, I don't know. I reached out to, or actually a business owner downtown reached out to me because they had somehow seen that on the agenda. And they were like, hey, we've got some input and we would like to do this and this. And they shared a lot of ideas. And I mentioned to them because they have reached out about stuff before. And I'm like, we need to do like a beautification committee and have somebody like you head it up that seems got to know about this stuff. And they said they'd be willing, and they said they knew some other people that would, and that, I thought that I had brought that up to y'all, but basically, they could help, a committee like that could help with stuff like, the plants, what we do with the trees. They had mentioned to me that maybe we could, if we were gonna do any sort of trees, maybe they need to be evergreens that don't drop leaves and don't get so big and maybe are easier to maintain in town. They could help with the Christmas decorations. They could help with doing a schedule or talk to interface with staff about, maybe we have the street sweeper clean one Monday a month or something, whatever. I don't know, just all kinds of things, but I'm with Michael. If there's competent people that want to volunteer to do something like that, it expands our capacity to town.
I agree.
So
You
I
all brought up the Christmas committee, forming a Christmas committee about decorations and stuff, is what y'all brought up several weeks ago.
yeah, well, I'm thinking like that could go under this umbrella. And I would support doing it. I would at least try it. I mean, you make it open for applications. If you don't get enough, you kill it. I mean,
Yeah, you gotta try it, but I think we need to run the vacuum truck downtown more than we do, because the streets are full of cigarette butts and they're nasty. And that downtown smoking has gotta go somehow.
Look at that.
Yeah, part of the reason for that is because our truck is actually in need of replacement. That'll be on the budget discussions here in a week's time, but yes, sir, I hear you. So I'm gonna stick with my suggestion. Let me do a little work on this and follow up with you all bring back some information and maybe we can talk more in depth at a future meeting. Is that
And I
okay?
think we need to coordinate with Crystal too,
Yeah,
because she works directly with the Women's Service League, and they've done it for years. And I think we have supplied the flowers for most of the time, and they do the plantings. But we've not always had enough plantings for downtown, and that's nobody's fault.
Well, regarding the women's league, if they continue to do it, maybe we need to show them pictures of what we want. And say, we would like it to look more like this.
But I don't know that they're a big group. They used to be a big group. I don't think they're a big group.
Hope not.
I'm jumping, excuse me, folks in the back, I'm having trouble here, because you all maybe. What's the sound? Sorry, go ahead.
I think, what is that? I was basically, I don't know what I said. I said it, but I don't remember.
You were saying that they've done it for years
They
and.
have done it for years, and they're a small group. They were a much larger group, but, they are a small
They're
group.
down.
They would easily come right in here and be very comfortable with any other volunteers that we put them with, including businesses. If we had a cleanup day, they would need a business, some kind of downtown cleanup day, where we're all out there picking up cigarette butts and putting out flowers. We just give us to know each other even better.
I've got a motto I like to use, and it's whatever it takes. Whatever it takes to make our town look nicer, I'm in favor of it.
Absolutely. Well said.
They ought to do with making our town a no smoking town. When you stand out in front of my shop and the wind's blowing this way, it smells like a tobacco factory.
It does.
It stinks terrible.
The General Assembly has actually prohibited us from passing local ordinances that
Can't do
do it, so, yeah. Got lobby the General Assembly if you want that change.
You'll come back to us.
Give me the money and I'll buy a bill, shut the business and we'll have it.
The balance of the smoking is, we have the containers, people put their cigarettes in there. But that too smells, so the.
Have
trying
you
to
looked
get
at that
rid of-
container down there? It must have 2,500 buttons in it.
Okay, no, but I'll look tomorrow.
So, Mr. Palmer, you okay with, Mr. Hooper? Putting that on?
Yeah. I mean, I think it's important to.
I agree.
Yeah.
We're okay.
Okay.
Okay, so, is there anybody have anything else?
Well, we got one quick.
Go ahead, please. Go ahead.
Wilson, we're still on track for the Sloop Park information being completed. And I mean, it's in process. Working on, I mean, we were trying to, I think on the master plan, trying to get our priorities and set so that we can, because I think we have the May 17th deadline for the
Yes,
application. So we are in process for that.
yes, sir. So I was actually gonna call each of you this week and ask to talk to you about our Smooth Park strategy. But yes, we will submit at least the Wilkes Medical Center Foundation by that date. I want to hear from the board about get some clarification on some Part F questions before we commit to this cycle Part F. But yes, the Wilkes Medical
Can you
Center.
put that on the meeting for next meeting?
Yeah. I might call a couple of you this week, and if I can't get you this week, then on Monday, when we gather in the morning, we'll talk about it.
Okay.
Do you have any updates on that list that Mary Elizabeth was making for the fundraising stuff? They may not all know about it.
Let's see if she's on. Mary Elizabeth, I'm gonna promote you. If you can, did you hear that question? I'm gonna promote you to ask you to answer that. Did you hear the question?
Can you repeat it one more time?
Can you update the board on that list of like fundraising, stuff you were coming up with? I hate to call it stuff, but I can't think of the word.
Yeah, so I'm working on kind of like a master Excel sheet that identifies sources of community grants and then eventually maybe like state and federal grants that looks at organization specific grants they have, how much they typically fund, who their contact people are, if they have any specific connections to Wilkes County, and what their policy is. Like if they take applications year round, if it's a specific date, if they don't, whether they accept unsolicited applications, whether you need to be invited. So whether we like use this information within like the next month to go after specific funding opportunities, or use it like 5 years from now. Theoretically, this can help us like plan and identify where these sources of grant funds are.
Thanks for the update.
Thank you.
Mhm.
Anyone have anything else? If not, I need a motion to adjourn. So. Second. All those in favor?